I've always had a knack for reading people, subtle shifts in tone, the flicker of an eye, a hesitation before answering. It started early, back when I was a kid trying to figure out what my parents were really thinking behind their forced smiles and tense silences. Over time, it became second nature, a kind of survival skill that sharpened with every relationship I had. But nothing prepared me for Jessica. We'd been married for 5 years, and for most of that time, I thought we had something real. She was charming, intelligent, and deeply perceptive in her own way. We built a life together, shared a home, friends, family dinners. Yet over the past year, something began to feel off. I started getting sick after meals she cooked. Nothing dramatic, just enough to be unsettling. Headaches, nausea, dizziness. The doctors couldn't find anything wrong. I blamed stress, lack of sleep, even caffeine. But deep down, I knew it wasn't normal. The first real moment of clarity came during a family brunch at my sister-in-law Caroline's house. Jessica had brought coffee from home, saying she wanted to make sure there was enough for everyone. When she handed me my cup, I caught a faint metallic scent beneath the usual aroma. It stopped me cold. My stomach twisted instinctively. I stared at the cup, watching steam curl into the air, and suddenly, everything clicked into place. That smell, it was familiar. Not from coffee, but from the moments before I got sick after eating food she prepared. A sharp, almost chemical undertone I hadn't been able to place until now. I felt like I was waking up from a long fog. I didn't drink it. Instead, I waited for the right moment. Caroline had poured herself a cup too, sitting across from me, chatting with our aunt about holiday plans. I made a joke, something loud and exaggerated that drew everyone's attention. As they laughed, I quickly switched my cup with hers. No one noticed. At first, I thought I was imagining things again. But as the meal wore on, Caroline began to look pale. Her laughter turned into grimaces. She pushed her plate away, excused herself to the bathroom, and didn't come back for nearly an hour. When she finally returned, her eyes were glassy, her voice shaky. I watched her closely, heart pounding. The symptoms mirrored mine exactly. That's when I knew this wasn't coincidence. Later that evening, I confronted Jessica. We were alone in the car, driving home in silence until I broke it with a simple question. What did you put in the coffee? She stiffened, gripping the steering wheel tighter. What are you talking about? Her voice was calm, practiced. The smell, I said. You know what I'm talking about. She didn't answer at first. Then, quietly, she said, You wouldn't understand. That was all I needed. Back home, I called 911. Caroline needed help. While I waited for the ambulance, I recorded everything. Our conversation, her shifting explanations, the way her voice cracked when she realized I'd figured out. I gathered old receipts, remnants of meals she'd prepared, anything I could use to prove what had been happening for months. The hospital confirmed it. There was a slow-acting toxin in Caroline's system, something that built up over time. Something that matched the pattern of how I'd been feeling. The doctors were stunned. They ran more tests, dug deeper, and found traces of the same poison in my blood work from earlier visits. It was subtle, carefully dosed, easy to dismiss as anxiety or fatigue. Jessica was arrested 2 days later. They searched our home and found more than I ever expected. Journals filled with notes on dosage, timing, effects. Names crossed out. Mine appeared multiple times. It was chilling. She had planned this meticulously, not just for me, but for others she saw as threats. Caroline apparently had become one. The trial dragged on for months. The media latched onto it. The poison marriage, they called it. People were fascinated by the idea of someone so seemingly normal hiding such darkness. Prosecutors painted her as manipulative, calculating. Defense attorneys tried to argue diminished capacity, some kind of twisted motive involving jealousy and resentment toward my career success. But the evidence was overwhelming. Recordings, medical reports, witness testimonies. Even her own journals were used against her. She was convicted and sentenced to 25 years. After everything, I moved out. I left the house, the city, even changed jobs. I needed distance, time to breathe without constantly looking over my shoulder. Healing wasn't easy. Trusting myself again, trusting anyone, took years. But slowly I rebuilt, not just my life, but my confidence. I started speaking openly about what happened, not for attention, but to help others recognize the signs I missed. Sometimes I think about what went wrong between us. Was it always there, buried under layers of charm? Or did something inside her shift over time? I'll never know. What I do know is that betrayal doesn't always scream. Sometimes it whispers. And if you're lucky, you learn to listen. Jessica tried to reach out once from prison. I didn't respond. Some doors need to stay closed. Now I live differently. More aware, more cautious, but also freer. I trust my instincts. I trust myself. And for the first time in a long while, I can walk through life without wondering if my next meal will be my last. I used to think that justice was the hardest part of healing. But after Jessica's trial, after the cameras stopped rolling and the headlines faded, I realized something far more difficult awaited me: learning how to live again. At first, I moved through life like a ghost. People treated me with a mix of pity and curiosity. Old friends reached out, some out of genuine concern, others just eager for details they could share later over drinks. I learned quickly who really cared and who was just feeding off the drama. I withdrew from most of them, focusing instead on the few who had stood by me without asking for anything in return. For months, I didn't talk much about what happened. Not because I wanted to forget, but because I needed time to process it on my own terms. I started journaling. Not the kind Jessica kept, filled with calculations and cold observations, but raw, unfiltered thoughts. My fears, my anger, my grief. I wrote about the man I used to be before all this, the version of myself that still believed love was enough to protect you from harm. Therapy helped too. At first, I resisted it. I told myself I could handle it alone. But trauma has a way of lingering, even when you think you've buried it deep enough. It surfaced in dreams, in sudden panic attacks at the smell of coffee, in the way I hesitated before eating food someone else prepared. Slowly, with help, I began to untangle the knots inside me. Rebuilding my career wasn't easy either. My name had been dragged through the media, not as a victim, but as a story. Potential clients Googled me and saw headlines before they saw my work. I had to prove myself all over again, not just professionally, but emotionally. I took smaller projects at first, then bigger ones. I focused on quality, consistency, integrity. Eventually, people stopped seeing me as that guy and started seeing me as someone who had endured something unthinkable and come out the other side stronger. One of the most unexpected parts of my recovery came from connecting with others who had gone through similar betrayals. Some were victims of emotional manipulation, others of physical abuse, masked as love. We shared our stories in quiet rooms and online forums, finding strength in numbers. I met a woman named Elena who had survived years of psychological control from her ex-husband. She taught me how gaslighting works, how it erodes your sense of reality until you start doubting your own instincts. I realized Jessica had done that to me too, made me question my health, my sanity, my memories. Knowing that gave me clarity. I also had to face the guilt. The guilt of not seeing it sooner, of letting it go on for so long, of doubting myself when I should have trusted my gut. That was the heaviest burden of all. But one day, during a therapy session, my counselor said something that stuck. You did survive. And surviving is not failure. That stayed with me. Over time, I found peace in small things. A morning run. A cup of tea I brewed myself. The sound of rain against the window while I read. I adopted a dog, a rescue, with a nervous energy I understood all too well. He stayed close, always watching, always alert. We healed together. As for Jessica, I don't think about her often. Occasionally, I get a letter she sends from prison, always unsigned, always addressed to me. I throw them away unopened. I don't need to hear her excuses. I don't need her approval or apology. What she did left scars, yes, but they're not fresh anymore. They're part of me now, proof of survival. Sometimes I wonder if she ever truly understood what she lost. Not just freedom, but the chance to be loved unconditionally. To build something real. She chose poison over partnership, resentment over respect. And maybe, somewhere deep down, she knew she couldn't beat me. So she tried to erase me. But I'm still here. And I'm not afraid anymore. The past doesn't define me. It informs me. It reminds me to listen closely, to trust my instincts, and to never let anyone dull my voice again. I walk into every room with my head high, knowing that I made it through hell and came out whole. Jessica may have tried to end my story, but I'm the one writing the ending.